Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Brockle. I'm the director of the Litigation Center. We want to welcome you to this event that we're hosting today online called Identifying and Outsmarting Bullies in the Legal Profession. It's hosted by the Litigation Center and co-sponsored by Career Services. We will have questions, if we can save questions until the end, and we will also have some raffles at the end as well. So stay tuned for those. We have two amazing speakers for you today. I got to talk to them a little bit before the event today as well. They're very personable and very knowledgeable on this topic, and I think they're going to have a lot of good information for you. So I'll start off by giving. I try to keep these bios brief, but there's so much good stuff in here. It was hard to cut anything out. But I'll start with Lynn Curry. She has a PhD and is the president of Communication Works Inc. and the founder of www.workplacecoachblog.com. And she has a weekly blog there where she has more than 2,400 subscribers from over 130 countries. She has qualified in court as an expert witness in the areas of management best practices, HR and workplace issues, and she's worked as an expert witness in the area of bullying. As a nationally respected management and HR consultant, she has worked with more than 4,300 organizations throughout the US and across the globe. Some of her clients include the World Bank, US Department of Defense, ConocoPhillips, and British Petroleum. She's also the author of several books: Managing for Accountability, A Business Leader's Toolbox; Beating the Workplace Bully, A Tactical Guide to Taking Charge; One by One, Managing Equally and Legally; and Solutions. And for the last 41 years, she has written a weekly Dear Abby of the Workplace newspaper column, adn.com, in newspapers found in Alaska, Washington, and Illinois. She's published in hundreds of articles, online media, and has appeared on radio shows and stations, including Voice of America, where she discussed workplace bullies and conflicts. And then she had several television appearances as well, and on some very big TV stations that you may know, such as ABC and Fox. There's also more, but like I said, it was hard to cut anything out because there's so much good stuff here. Lynn has a doctorate in social psychology from Union Graduate School West, which is a senior professional in human resources certificate from the Human Resources Certification Institute, and a senior certified professional certificate from the Society for Human Resource Management. So that's Lynn. And I'm going to also give you the bio for Heidi K. Brown, who we have here as well. So Heidi K. Brown graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law. She's a professor at Brooklyn Law School and a former litigator in the construction industry. She has a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Brown served as of counsel with Moore & Lee LLP, which is a boutique litigation firm with offices in the Washington, D.C. area and New York City, where she handled litigation and arbitration of complex construction contract and building development disputes. She was an associate at the Manhattan firm of Thatcher, Profit and Wood, and at the Washington, D.C. area firm of Watt, Teeter, Hoffer, and Fitzgerald LLP. She also is the author of several texts, one of them being The Introverted Lawyer, a 7-step journey toward authentically empowered advocacy; Untangling Fear in Lawyering, a 4-step journey toward powerful advocacy; The Flourishing Lawyer, set to come out April of this year, so stay tuned, a multi-dimensional approach to performance and well-being. And Professor Brown offers positive psychology coaching to help law students, lawyers, and other members of the legal profession to amplify their authentic advocacy voices. So again, like I said, you've got some really, really talented and well-accomplished speakers here. So I'll let the event kick off by starting with Lynn, if you want to take it away, and then Heidi will follow up in the second half of the
Awesome.
event.
So I'm going to start off by defining bullying, the forms of bullying, give you some tips that you might not expect on how to handle confrontation, and then give you a piece on the types of bullying. And then Heidi, of course, will follow up by customizing this to the legal profession and the types that you're likely will meet or have met already. As we move into this, I don't need to echo what Rachel has already done about my background. However, the process I most often handle is called organizational firefighting, where an organization is in a true mess and I move in. Those are the 3 books. And Here we go. Bullying defined. So what bullying is psychological violence. Sometimes it comes with physical violence, but it always comes with psychological violence. It is in your brain, you're being messed with. You're being manipulated or intimidated. And the key to what is bullying versus somebody who just bullies is that someone who bullies and is a true bully is doing it repeatedly and intentionally. And we've probably all bullied at some point, but that doesn't make us a bully. If you're a bully, you've got a pattern. And when I do investigations into bullying, that's what I look for. Is there truly a pattern? Now, the forms of bullying might be verbal or physical or situational. And by the way, in your chat box, I believe Rachel sent you out some handouts that mirror these PowerPoints. So you have what I'm presenting, though I hope I'll add a few anecdotes and give it in a bit more detail. Verbal bullying is what we often think of when we think of bullying. That's the ridicules, the insults, the negative name calling, the slandering, making somebody the butt of mean jokes or comments. And if you've ever been the target, you know how this can take you down to your knees. Then, and this is where more of the lawsuits come about, there is the physical bullying, the shouting, shoving, tripping, poking, the obscene gestures, and occasionally assault or a threat of physical assault. Because it tends to be that bullies really think they're the master of the universe, and they forget that there are laws that surround them. And then, and this caught Microsoft and some other large organizations, Dish Network. There is the sabotage, the intentional humiliation, the deliberate interference, where someone decides to change your work life for the worse and can move into mobbing. I see a couple notes in the chat box, so I'm wondering, Rachel and Claude, if there are questions you want us to answer as we get started, or do you want me just to keep going?
That was me, Lynn, putting in your slides. You reminded me to put the slides and your bio into the chat. And then now that you reminded me, I'll put Heidi's in as well once she gets.
Very cool. Okay. This is the part of the presentation you might not be expecting, because I want to give you a sense of what happens in bullying. So what happens is the bully does something. They send a salvo across the bow. And I'm going to do something right now. As I do it, I'd like you to notice what happens to your breathing and just react to it. Notice your breathing. Hey, what happened? And how many of you found yourself pausing for breath just for a moment? And when you paused for breath, what happened is if you breathe rapid and shallow or just literally paused, you moved into right hemisphere. Now, notice how your head is tilting, and you can take a look at Heidi's really lovely head and notice she's got a slight tilt to the left, and you can, with your own self, notice how your head is tilting, and Rachel seems to have a slight tilt to the right. And right at this moment, I seem to also have a slight tilt to the left. So what that tilt means is you're neurally processing at this moment left hemispheric, which fits. You're listening to my presentation, you're thinking, which means you're over here in logic, analysis, problem resolving, language, and sense of future consequence. You're linear thinking, analytically thinking. Now, what happens when someone presses your button and you react? You move into reaction. It's in right hemisphere. It's an equally good hemisphere. An easy way to tell when someone is in right hemisphere is their head will be straight up and down. The tilt is left, straight up and down is right. And when you move into reaction and you are ordinarily a left hemispheric person, and probably to be as skilled as you are in law, you might be left hemispheric. When you move into reaction, you're in your weaker hemisphere. And what happens, the bully moves you into right hemisphere, and without left hemisphere, you lose access. Have any of you ever been so upset you couldn't talk? You lost temporary access to language. This also happens when you're put on the spot. My personal favorite is when I get upset, I say incredibly stupid things I later deeply regret. That means I completely lost access to sense of future consequence. Oh, well, later you think, shouldn't have done that. Now you need both hemispheres to handle a bully. You need your ability to react, to emotionally connect, to intuit, to think of a new answer. You need your ability to logically take it apart, to analyze it, to talk, and to know strategically where it's going. So you need both. Unfortunately, we get trapped. The bully sends that salvo. We react. What we need is to be proactive. So how do you change the flow? The easiest thing I can tell you is what was on the bottom of this other slide. And if you've ever stood at the edge of the coast and looked at the ocean or sea, or even a river where there were waves, I'd like you to remember how it felt when you watched waves go outward and then back in. Now, wave-like action when we're watching waves relaxes us. So there's another wave-like action that you have complete individual control over. That's your breathing. You breathe in, there's a transitional pause. You breathe out, there's a transitional pause. You breathe in. It's really a pattern or a flow or breathing. So what we've got is the bully sends a salvo and you can react, or you can go straight into coastline breathing. The quickest way to learn it is just take 50 seconds with your eyes closed. So if you wouldn't mind closing your eyes, please notice your breathing. And as you notice your breathing, notice whenever your next exhalation is, that transitional pause between exhalation and inhalation. Whenever your next inhalation is, and let yourself flow with your breathing, noticing only your breathing. And then as you open your eyes, open your eyes, no fair sleeping. As you open your eyes, you've regained the ability to access simultaneously left and right hemisphere, which most of us have most of the time. But most of us get stuck in one or the other hemisphere when we're breathing rapidly. And if you're a left hemispheric person, all of you there with tilted heads, and a bully is pressing your button and you're stuck in right hemisphere, you're in deep trouble. Okay, here we go. I want to give you the 7 types of bullies. And in my book, Beating the Workplace Bully, I had a lot of fun explaining each of these types, because what I learned is that strategies that work to unravel one type will be different than the strategies used to unravel another type. So if you have in your tool chest a number of strategies and pick up what kind of bully it is, then you'll know how to handle it. I will also say that someone can be 2 or 3 of these. I once pulled my whole team over and said, hey, this guy who we just caught on video, he's got 4 of the types solid. Here we go. So the very first is the traditional bully we think of. This is the blamer, demeanor, belittler, name caller, fault finder, and they sap our energy. We respond emotionally and physically, and by the time we go home at the end of the day, we're whooped. It is a very successful pattern. People who are raised by a bully get a master class in how to swagger, name call, slam doors, and then they decide to do it themselves because that takes them out of being prey, and they discover that they're pretty successful. If you ever wonder what raises a bully, it's either somebody raised by a bully or somebody raised by a victim, because there's something called the drama triangle, and most of us get a piece of it, but bullies tend to grow up with a lot of it. This is the toughest kind of bully, and the one I have met most often in your profession of law. a number of very successful trial litigators, not the trial litigator who happens to work for me, but other trial litigators are scorched earth fighters. They pull out all the stops. They don't even care if they win. They want to make sure you lose as well. And in the book I wrote, I detail a court scene where a woman is confronted by a scorched earth fighter, and he so unravels her that she's temporarily speechless. And then the judge leans over, and I watched this in action. Judge Ripley leaned over and said, "Wasn't it that you meant to say X?" And she looked at him and said, "Judge, yes." And then when the litigator came at her again, she said, "What the judge just said." Because when we watch a scorched earth fighter, some of us who are witness, and there is no witness protection, we want to leap into action. This one is a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. It's the silent grenade. They only have to explode once or twice a year, but you'll see their jaw getting white or red, their jaw tightening, their eyes narrowing, and there's a sense of unstoppable rage. And at that moment, you freeze. Okay, this is the hardest to deal with. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. This is the one who slippery slides into the workplace, and the boss thinks is such a good guy. In fact, other people are not fair to this one. This person can pretend that his coworkers or her coworkers mistreat and misjudge them, and they, in effect, weaken everybody else's relationship with the boss. They kiss up and claw down. They charm anyone they seek to opportunities from or to take advantage of. And other people are not so lucky. Now, if you've ever wondered how come a husband or wife could be a bully to their spouse, but a great parent to their kids, it's because bullies can intentionally choose who to mess with. And for the shapeshifter, part of their success is showing a facade to the rest of the world that the boss doesn't figure out. In the workplace, what I've discovered is if you get the CEO to organize a 360-degree review where people can anonymously respond to what they see, it becomes very clear. I recently worked with a large organization where the board gave an unconditional vote of confidence to the CEO and told me that the medical director was just a totally good guy, but misunderstood. And I wound up interviewing 78 people and then talking to the 11-person board who completely believed the Kool-Aid that the CEO and a CMO were serving, and detailed what I saw from those 78 interviews. And that's generally the only way to take out a shapeshifter. Okay, we've all seen a narcissist. And I think Heidi's going to talk about how that social pathology and bullies can relate. This is I am the only one in the world. I am the center of my universe. I am inherently superior to you. If you let me bully you, you deserve it. Here's to unravel them. They cannot take criticism. So you criticize them, particularly in public, and they completely lose it. A woman who wrote me one day after reading Beating the Workplace Bully called me and said, I have to go up in public against this guy who unravels me. And I said, what does he do? And she said, well, the last time I walked to the podium, he said, fat thighs. And I lost it. I thought, I look really bad in my pantsuit. And my GM asked me what the problem was, and I couldn't tell him that this bully unraveled me. So we just practiced for a while, and she had to do another presentation. She and this bully were up for a promotion. One of them was going to win. 3 months after her first presentation, she walked to the podium. And as she walked past him, he whispered loudly enough for her and others to hear, "Big butt." And she looked at him and said, "Sir, how does my butt size matter to you?" Well, everybody around him laughed, and he sat red-faced and was speechless, because bullies who are narcissists, they can't take it. They feel entitled to win, to play by their own rules. And this is how sometimes they run afoul of the National Labor Relations Board or OSHA or the EEOC. Finally, and this came about because my granddaughter and I were watching National Geographic when I was writing the book. There was another type, and I was struggling to get their name. And I saw a National Geographic show about a rhino. And so this is the wounded rhino. This is sometimes they are in IT or some other back of the house profession. They are forceful and mean-spirited and malevolent. They want to attack you. They're ill-tempered if you disturb them. They're malevolent. They simply don't care. Their goal is to dominate you. And unlike the scorched earth fighter who wants you gone, the wounded rhino wants you around so they can continue to mess. Okay. I am going to undo my share and pass the baton to Heidi. And let's see how I undo that. There it is. Okay, Heidi, you ready to rock?
Yes, I am. Let me just get started here. Okay, I thought if attendees feel comfortable and you want to pop into the chat what role you play in the legal profession right now, that I can tailor some of my notes specifically to you. So if you're a 1L or a 2L or a 3L or an alumna or a practicing attorney or any role in the legal profession and you feel like sharing, let me know. But I thought I would start off by describing the type of people that we might encounter in our profession who will qualify as bullies. And to give you a little bit of context, so I went to law school literally 3 decades ago. I was very young when I went to law school. I was 21, graduated when I was 24, and I got a job. I was so excited to get my first summer associate job. I sent out 100 resumes. My grades my first year in law school were not stellar, so I had to pound the pavement, and I sent out 100 resumes and got a job that just happened to be in a firm that specialized in construction litigation. So I was surrounded by, tough guys kind of arguing about money. And I went there both my summers in law school, got a job there after law school, took the bar exam in Virginia. And it was a very aggressive style of practicing law. Now, I'm kind of a quiet person. I'm an introvert, and I'll talk a little bit more about how bullies can sometimes target quiet individuals in our profession, but we bring tremendous assets to our profession. So I'm going to highlight a little bit of how the bully dynamic plays out in our profession. But here are just some of the categories of individuals that I encountered in 15 full-time years of law practice. And since then, I've been a law professor for 13 years. And I've even seen this sometimes in legal academia as well. So I want to make sure that we put out on the table what kinds of people we might encounter. And then we're going to talk about very practical tips of what we can do about this and stand up for ourselves, be that proud, strong, even if we're quiet, contributor to our profession, and also stand up for others. So people that I encountered in construction litigation, we had to do not only a lot of litigation and going to court and taking depositions, but a lot of negotiations. So you can imagine, several decades ago, I was young, female. I have this ferocious blushing response when I get nervous, and I would be across the table from these negotiators trying to negotiate these high dollar construction contracts. And they could see that in my face that I was nervous, and they would go for the attack. They would just be nasty towards me and talk over me and contradict me and really kind of gaslight me, convince me that something I said wasn't true, or convince me that I hadn't said something that I had. So bullying can take place around the negotiating table. I still have nightmares about some of my depositions. I don't know if any of you have been practicing taking depositions yet or have been part of depositions, but the deposition environment, I sometimes found myself one of the only female participants in the room besides the court reporter. A lot of times, a couple of decades ago, was usually female. And it would be us surrounded by a bunch of really tough, strong, angry guys who would sit across the deposition table from me and object to all my questions. If I was taking the deposition, I still have nightmares about this one deposition where this very strong, very smart, very good attorney, he used to chew on an unlit cigar and stare me down across the deposition table, which just made my face turn red and I would sweat and stress out. Although I was completely prepared for every deposition, and he would object to every one of my questions. And then when tables were turned and he was the deposition taker and I was defending our client's witnesses, I would object and be very certain about my objection. And he would sort of wave his hand at me and be like, what was wrong with that question? What was wrong with my question? So no matter what, everything I tried to do, this particular lawyer would try to shut me down and embarrass me in front of my client, the court reporter, other people in the room. I love legal writing as an introvert. That's my specialty as a lawyer. It was my specialty. It's what I teach now. I love teaching law students how to find their advocacy voices through writing. But we can experience bullying even through legal writing. Many, many times in my litigation career, I would receive a brief from opposing counsel or even receive just letters or emails where they would go on personal attacks, accusing me or people on my team of misrepresenting the law, which I would never do. And so sometimes we have to look out for whether there's a bully in the person sending a brief or sending a letter or saying something in a document that the judge is going to see that's just not true, and setting us up for the reaction that Lynn talked about. I will share with you on the next slide, but I'll save it for a minute. We experience volatility in the office. I worked at 3 different law firms. My first law firm, which I actually loved, was a medium-sized boutique construction law firm. Then I moved to New York from Virginia, worked in big law for a year. And then the final chapter of my time in law practice was working for a small 10-person attorney firm. At all 3 firms, I worked for at least one partner who was incredibly erratic, hard to predict what he was going to do, very moody, angry all the time. So that can be really tough to deal with. And I'll give some examples of that in a second. Other forms of bullying in the legal profession, sometimes you might work for somebody or be on a case with opposing counsel who dramatizes everything. Everything becomes like a 5-alarm fire. And you start to think, oh no, I can't go on that vacation I finally planned, or oh my gosh, I have to work all weekend. When really that's just a form of manipulation where we as maybe more junior people in the office don't realize that this person is blowing everything up, maybe a tiny little logistical error or a strategic mistake that happens in our practice. Law practice is incredibly procedurally and substantively complicated, and mistakes, we try to avoid them, but sometimes they happen. And these particular forms of bullies will dramatize every little glitch and blow it up into something that really doesn't warrant that type of reaction. And then I have the last one on the screen is the information hoarder. So many times as a junior associate, I never knew if it was okay for me to go home, or if I really could take a vacation after a year of not taking vacation. And some bullies in the legal profession will hoard information and sort of keep you in the dark on whether you can stop working on a project, or whether you did a good job on a project, or whether it's time for you to move on to a different project. So I will share just 3 anecdotes of my experience, and then we'll start to get into what we can do about this, practical steps. I mentioned that I worked for 3 different law firms, and I still get embarrassed even saying this out loud because I never did anything about it. But at all 3 law firms, I worked under particular partners who threw things across the room. They would throw, there's a pair of car keys on the screen here. One of the partners had this big BMW, and he actually took his BMW car keys and threw them across the conference room at me because he was mad. Not at me, but just mad at something. But we shouldn't have to go to work and have to dodge staplers. I dodged a stapler. I dodged a dry erase marker being thrown across the room. Car key. we should not have to go to work and worry that something is going to hit us in the head. But those are very real circumstances that I went through over the arc of my career. There's a picture of a fist poking through a wall. Someone I worked for many years ago was angry that there was a typo in like the return address labels of the office stationery. He got so mad, he punched a hole in the wall. And then that became a badge of honor, though. The firm left the hole in the wall. And I think someone at one point made a joke about it and put a frame around the hole. Instead of calling out this behavior, it became sort of this badge of coolness, which I don't think we should be promoting that type of behavior. And then at the bottom of the screen, I just have this feeling of this picture that to me suggests a feeling of shame. Even in legal academia, I run a program. I bear a lot of responsibility for making policy decisions. And there have been situations, even in the law school environment, where I've been in meetings and people will just attack me verbally for decisions that I made using what I thought were collaborative decision-making measures, but language that was used to kind of humiliate me in front of other people. I strongly feel that we should eliminate that from our profession as much as we can, or learn how to stand up to it. I tend to do that freeze mode that Lynn was talking about when I feel personally attacked. I have the fight, flight, and freeze mode. I go into freeze mode. And as an introvert, I do process my thoughts internally, methodically, and kind of slowly before I'm able to react. I got mad at myself because I didn't stand up for myself in the moment with that particular academic scenario. But I've been working on it, and I have techniques now. I've studied and written a lot about introversion and fear, and I take boxing lessons now to sort of tap into my inner athlete, my inner fighter, not in a bad way, but in a way that I can react in a calm, methodical, but strong way to make sure that never happens to me or anyone else again. So sometimes, in my experience, in all of those kind of unpleasant parts of my career, I have many highlights in my career. So I don't want any of you 1Ls, 2Ls, and 3Ls to feel like, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? Our profession, it can be very wonderful and fulfilling and rewarding. But I did go through a lot of experiences in which I thought it was me. I thought, oh, am I just too quiet? Am I too nice? Am I too much of a sort of person who likes to study and squirrel away in my office writing briefs? Do I just need to be tougher and louder and more obnoxious and faster? Do I need to be smarter? How is that possible to make myself smarter? Do I need to predict what's on these people's minds? Do I just need to be mean like them? Do I just need to mirror their behavior to be good at my job? No, we do not need to mirror their behavior. Everyone who's listening to this right now, we all bring incredible assets to this profession that sometimes get stomped on or overlooked or not heralded as famously as someone who can waltz into the courtroom and just blow everyone away with their great performance. Some of us might not be great at that, but we bring incredible assets to the profession, and our profession needs us. So I want to just really emphasize, we do not need to fake it till we make it or mirror someone else's behavior to be good at our jobs as attorneys. In fact, we need to be ourselves, and we can learn to amplify our advocacy voices authentically. We don't need to just I was told many times in my career, grow a thicker skin, like that's possible, right? I don't want to be less sensitive than I am. Sensitivity is what makes me a good writer, what makes me a good listener, and what makes me a good teacher, and what makes me a good friend. So we don't want to beat this out of ourselves. We just want to learn how to stand up for ourselves in the moment and do that more rapidly instead of thinking about that great comeback 3 hours later, like I usually do. Okay, so just to echo Lynn's definition of bullying, and this really helps us figure out, am I in the presence of a bully, or am I just in the presence of somebody having a bad day? We're all capable of having a bad day. But to reiterate Lynn's definition, this is something that happens repeatedly, but there's also usually a power differential. So in all those episodes that I described, I was the more junior person, or the more physically smaller person, or just in the hierarchy of the law firm, I was more vulnerable. And so I want you to, when you think about, am I being bullied right now? Think about whether there's a power differential and also that repetitive pattern that Lynn mentioned. So power differentials in the legal profession can come from hierarchy. Obviously, our profession is a bit hierarchical. We all go through stages of our career development, but it can be physically. Is someone more physically intimidating than we are? Social demographics can create a power differential. In all those depositions I mentioned, I had less experience than the attorneys I was up against in some of those negotiations or depositions. Money can sometimes create a power differential, and then even personality type. I'm again a huge fan of the quiet, hardworking lawyer, but we're going to encounter people who aren't necessarily quiet. That doesn't make them bullies, but we need to be mindful of whether personality types sometimes create a perceived power differential, especially in the type of lawyering activities that we undertake. Again, just to really hone in on what bullying is. It's conduct that we feel, and we get to decide what we feel. If we feel intimidated, threatened, humiliated, or if it's behavior that's interfering with our ability to get our work done. If any of these things are happening, we can start to analyze, is this a situation of bullying because there's a power differential and also it's repeated conduct, it's a pattern. So why does this matter? I mean, obviously it's not fun for the particular person who feels as though they're being targeted by a bully. But this really, in my opinion, has ripple effects throughout our profession. And our profession already suffers from well-being issues. Bullying is an issue that we can target head on, because if we don't, it's going to have ripple effects, not just for the person who's being affected by it, but everyone around that situation. In that law firm environment, in that law school environment, if it's happening there, in bar associations, and then outward into our society. It causes us undue stress. We lose self-esteem. I remember feeling so bad about myself, like I was such a hard worker, but I didn't feel good when I went to work every day. It can affect our cognitive abilities, our memory, our creativity. Lawyering is not, we sometimes think, oh, the law is just right and wrong or win and lose. We need to be creative as lawyers. And if we're not able to tap into that side of ourselves, we're going to miss out on solving problems, finding really creative solutions to complex legal problems. We can be distracted by the bullying, start making mistakes, and obviously we don't want to do that. And also, this bullying and lack of civility in our profession doesn't do us any favors to sort of reverse those stereotypes about lawyers that we see on TV and movies all the time. So these are the downsides, but let's talk about what we can start doing. I want us to also empower ourselves to not listen to many times in my career dealing with bullies, we, and I include myself, we sort of shrugged it off and just said, okay, well, he's just a strong personality, or she's just an eccentric, but she's a rainmaker. She brings in all these clients. So let's just ignore the behavior. Or things like, oh, well, they just have high expectations. Or obviously these cases are really high stakes. So obviously they're just under a lot of pressure. But if we keep excusing this type of behavior over and over and over again, nothing is ever going to change. I also heard many times with opposing counsel who were being, in my opinion, bullies, oh, well, that's just zealous advocacy. That's their way of showing their client that they're a pit bull and they're going to really work hard for their case. The client expects that, I used to hear. And then in the academic environment, sometimes the way that we hear people speaking to each other about each other, we dismiss it or excuse it and call it, that's intellectual rigor, or that's this notion of radical candor. But this really chips away at our soul. It really chips away at our soul. So I'm going to give us permission to, some of these reasons might have an iota of truth, but we don't need to use them to justify true bullying behavior anymore. Root causes. Now, these are not excuses. Again, these might be reasons, though, and it's important for us to differentiate reasons from excuses. But some of the people that we might work for or be across the negotiation or deposition table were just trained poorly. As Lynn mentioned, they probably didn't have great role models growing up. But also what I see in law school sometimes is that we're not talking about these issues enough. That's why I'm so grateful for this talk today, this opportunity to talk about this today, Because if we can start talking about proper modeling and proper training, how do we handle a bully in a negotiation or in an oral argument situation or in the office, we can stop this from being a forever perpetuating cycle. But it's possible that some of the people we might be working with have never been properly trained in how to communicate when they're angry, or how to negotiate without seeming like they need to beat everyone, or as Lynn pointed out, they don't just want to win, they want everyone to lose. Lynn mentioned narcissism, and this is something I've been really researching a lot lately. And narcissists have, while they come across as incredibly arrogant, at the root, they have incredibly fragile egos. They're very insecure. And so the way that they get their it's called narcissistic supply. They target individuals who have high levels of empathy and are patient and will try to explain themselves, because that gives the narcissist a rush. It's a game for them. Maybe they don't realize they're doing it, but they're doing it. And it all comes down to this deep-seated insecurity. But that's not our problem, okay? We don't need to do the work for them to help them work on themselves. We need to call out the behavior and say that this is unacceptable in our legal profession. Honestly, a lot of times I dealt with bullies in my career who were stressed, and a lot of them had personal crises happening, marital issues. Many of them had anger management problems. Substance abuse issues were definitely happening in some of those. But again, not our problem to fix, but we can identify this as a possible root cause. And then we can start targeting behavior, calling out the behavior, and making sure that we make it clear that that's unacceptable and is not conducive to us doing our best work. I want to point out, I wrote near the bottom, insufficient character development. Now, we all know as law students and lawyers and law professors that part of our profession requires us to have character and fitness to practice law. I constantly fill out character and fitness forms for my students. But in my opinion, I don't think we talk enough about what it means to have character. I feel like in law school, we can talk so much more about what does it mean to have character, and can we change and develop and nurture and cultivate character. It's not something we just have or we don't. It's not something you have on day one of law school or the day you apply for admission to the bar. Character is something that we can talk about, hone, curate, cultivate, foster, all of those things. And it's quite possible that some of these bullies have never thought about what it means to have true character. They might have passed their character and fitness evaluation to get into the bar, but have they thought about what it means to have good character? Okay, and then fear, certainly. I know a lot of the experts say that bullies are really afraid, and I don't love that excuse, but because that to me doesn't justify their behavior, but they are probably afraid of losing the case. They're afraid of not impressing their client. They're afraid of what you might think of them. Again, not our job to fix their fear, but this might help enlighten us as to why this is happening. Okay, so let's talk about the good stuff with the time we have left of what can and should we do. I would love for us as a community, as a legal community, to regard civility, the opposite of bullying, as an advocacy tool. I have on the screen a picture of a cruise ship, and one of my favorite cases I ever worked on, it was between a cruise line and a shipyard, and there was a problem with the rotor of the ship, and there were many millions of dollars at stake. But I so fondly remember working on that case because the lawyers on the other side were so civil. They were incredibly smart and very strategic, but because they were nice, we didn't have to worry about things being canceled or scheduled at the last minute. We could actually breathe. Our briefs were better. Our negotiations were better. And that case ended on a high note for everybody. Civility is a sign of power in our profession, empowerment. It's a sign of confidence. I love the concept of intellectual humility. We don't all have to walk around acting like we're the smartest people in the room, or we know the answers to all the legal questions. We don't. Our profession is very complicated. It's okay for us to say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to go find out, or let's figure this out together. So I like to say intellectual humility is hot. Pretending we know everything is not. And now I have on there, proper modeling. Let's improve education in law school and practice about good character and what it means to be fit, which is kind of what we're starting to do today. And then knowledge is power. Let's know our ABA and state bar rules about courtesy and civility and anti-bullying, and practice amplifying our voices. I'll point out 2 guidelines, and then we'll get into sort of 5 steps for diffusing bullies when we're in the moment. Now, the ABA guidelines say things like this: we will treat everyone in a civil and courteous manner. And the second bullet, we will not, even when called on by a client, abuse or indulge in offensive conduct. But what kind of gives us a little snag here is that these guidelines go on to say these are purely aspirational. So there's no hammer. I mean, I don't want us to be talking about hammering anything, but these are purely aspirational. So sometimes it's going to be up to us to say in the moment, no, this behavior is not acceptable, because we might not be able to actually get a court to do anything about it. I love this book by Benjamin Sells called The Soul of the Law. And there's this great quote in this book about how talking about incivility and talking about bullying, it gives us an opportunity to think about these concepts of citizenship and householding, like thinking about our profession as a household. And we don't want our household to be in disarray and chaos. We want our household to be calm and nurturing and a place where we can thrive and flourish. And so Benjamin Sells talks about how this very issue, bullying in our profession or lack of civility, is pointing us. It's really a call to action for us to do something about this as a community, as citizens of the legal profession. And then again, former Supreme Court Justice O'Connor said the same thing. If we enhance civility, we can enhance the pleasure we get out of law practice. Obviously, our jobs are hard and they're intellectually complicated, but we deserve for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years of our career to actually enjoy what we do. And bullies kind of are trying to rob us of that. And let's not let them. All right, so action plans. I think it would be fun for each of us or each of our communities, our offices, our classrooms, our groups to craft an anti-bullying mission statement. And if you're not part of a particular group, craft one for yourself. And as individuals, we can teach ourselves to, when we see something happen, we can say something about it. And that's going to teach us to stand up for and amplify others. I know we're getting short on time, so I'm going to get to the steps. So I told Lynn when we were put on this panel together, I'm sort of having this starstruck celebrity moment, because when I wrote a bit about bullying in the legal profession, I read Lynn's book and I was quoting her. So I pulled out a couple key quotes that I think will help us figure out what to do. So when we're in a bullying moment, the thing that the bully wants us to do the most is not trust ourselves. And so step one is, if you feel like you're being bullied, you feel like this might be a power differential, this might be the second time this has happened, and it's intimidating or humiliating or scary behavior, trust your feelings. So that is step one. This is not your fault. You did not bring this upon yourself. It's not because of a weakness or some perceived flaw in you. Trust your feelings. Step two, we're going to take a beat, take a breath, pause, assess, and plan. And I loved reading in Lynn's book that bullies interpret silence as concession. I made mistakes in practice because I thought that just by keeping my head down and sticking to my deposition outline, or not calling out the bully, I thought that was the right tack. It's not, because when I was silent, they knew they could do it again. So, but what we're going to do is we're going to pause, assess, and plan. And the pause can just be a couple seconds or a minute if we need it. And then step three, I always need to do two things: a mental reboot and a physical reboot, because I have a tendency to immediately launch a soundtrack of I've done everything wrong. But we can notice, catch ourselves if we start to take on the blame for the situation, take stock of what just happened, maybe listen, replay in your head, okay, this person just said this to me or did that aggressive body language towards me. And then we launch a new accurate soundtrack. Not that we did anything to deserve it or that we're wrong, but we do not deserve this behavior and it needs to stop. Step four is channeling our inner athlete. This is the physical recalibration. when I realized before I started studying this, that when I'm feeling intimidated by a bully, my body reacts and tries to make me small. It tries to protect me. It thinks it's doing something good. But my shoulders cave in, I cross my arms, I cross my legs, I sort of look like I'm cowering. That's not at all what we want to do. We want to, I take boxing lessons now to sort of channel this inner power. Not that I'm going to fight back, but I'm going to put my shoulders back, open up my arms. You can do this seated or standing, ground both feet on the floor, summon your inner power, get that breathing going that Lynn talked about before. If you like the notion of a power pose, you can put your hands on your hips or maybe behind your head like this for a minute, breathe. And then we step into the real meat of what we're talking about today. Diffusing the bully, we need to cut the bully's power source. As Lynn said in her amazing book, remain silent and you collude. We do not want to do that. But we have to be precise here. We're not going to belabor the point. We're just going to concisely and deftly say one thing. And Lynn, you can feel free to chime in if you have suggestions. But Lynn says, let's build and memorize an arsenal of statements and questions that will swiftly neutralize the verbal attack. So for me, I've tried using things like, you raising your voice at me right now is not conducive to me doing my best work, period. Or it's things like that, just one sentence. I so wish I could go back and redo all those depositions and have my arsenal of just 5-word sentences that show the bully, hey, I heard you, I see what you're doing here, and I'm not going to put up with it.
Yes.
But I'm also not going to fight with you. So I'm just going to get it on the record, or I'm going to make sure people around me see it, or I'm going to step in and do that for somebody else whose brain, like mine, sometimes doesn't work that quickly in the moment. And we're going to just end that dynamic right then and there. So all this is really about us giving ourselves regard. Our profession needs all of you. We need good thinkers, creative problem solvers, collaborative problem solvers, good oral advocates, amazing writers. All of us have different assets and strengths we bring to the profession. And it's time we give each and every one of ourselves regard for what we contribute. So I will unshare my screen. I've written a couple articles about bullying, and I think that Rachel put them in the chat, but I think we have 7 whole minutes for questions. So I will mute myself and then.
Okay, I'm going to let Chloe jump in, and we'll take any questions from the audience here, and Chloe will help sort of.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I can read them out, or you can private message me if you don't want to post your question publicly and I'll read it for you. Or feel free to just unmute and ask a question. I'll give everyone a few minutes here.
Well, I know I have a question if students want to just think about, students and attorneys here want to just think about their questions. So when I had experienced bullying or seen bullying, a lot of the jobs had things like there would be like a Mean Girls Club where a group of girls would get together, talk about others, and or sometimes it's men too, but just what I saw a lot was women in the fields I was in. And then there's exclusivity where some people are invited to things, some aren't. Turning others against each other and talking about each other, and bosses trying to make subordinates feel bad about themselves or their work, or even trying to make them cry. Or yelling at them, right? You mentioned a lot of those. So my question out of seeing those kind of scenarios is, do you think that the stress of the profession can sometimes emphasize or aggravate this type of bullying behavior? Because I just was so shocked to see that every place I was at, seemed to have that kind of situation going on.
I do. I think that sometimes stress makes us revert to high school behavior. And I feel for what you're saying. I feel like when I feel inferior to stronger personalities in a bullying scenario, it takes me back to feeling left out in high school. That's why, yes. So I think we need to address those particular dynamics in each office environment at their root, but also what we can do as individuals. And Lynn, feel free to chime in. But what's helped me is really working on that mental soundtrack and letting go of the misplaced shame. I heap all this stuff on myself, but instead I had to learn, no, this isn't about me. I worked hard to be here. I'm prepared for this. I know what I'm talking about. I deserve to have a voice. even if I turn red, I'm turning red right now, and my voice shakes, but I'm prepared for this lawyering scenario, or I deserve to be in this office, or I deserve to be invited to that, whatever. But then the physical for me is even bigger than the mental. It wasn't until I really started studying my physical manifestations of fear towards bullies that I realized I was falling right into their trap. I was physically looking like I'd been hit, like I would flinch or my shoulders would cave in. So for me, really starting to I like the concept of lawyers and law students treating ourselves like scholar athletes. I was always envious of the kids in college who were scholars and athletes. We can act like that. For me, I like taking boxing because it makes me feel strong. I know that when I lose my breath, I can pause and get it back. I have that power to do that for myself. And I know how to carry my posture better now. It doesn't always go perfectly. When I'm in a bullying scenario, even now, sometimes in school, I have to catch myself because my instinct is to do what I've always done. But you stop, using Lynn's great advice, you pause, you reflect, and then you recalibrate, and then you step back in, assert short, quick little response, and then you can just calm yourself down and move on to doing the hard intellectual work.
I'm going to add in that when we're under stress, we revert to our more basic abilities, our default, and we're depleted. So we're less able. I love that Heidi takes boxing. For me, it was Taekwondo. And since I hike in Alaska, one quarter, I ran into a bear 8 weekends in a row. And then I ran into a wolf pack. And my defense there was a golden retriever and a Shih Tzu. So I learned through Taekwondo how to quickly breathe and regain control of my power. And I believe that is part of what we need to do when a bully comes at us. So the bully comes at you, you want that training to be able to center yourself, ground yourself, and say something like, "Is that the best you got?" Or, "Pardon me?" As if you sweetly, innocently can't believe anybody said something so stupid. Who's got a question?
I received a question from someone privately. They want to ask, how often does a focus on social prominence and conformity defeat lawyers who are more focused on the quality of their professional contributions and the quality of their work?
Heidi, that's got to be for you.
What a brilliant question. Oh my gosh, my introverted brain needs 5 minutes to think about it. Can you repeat the question, Chloe? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I had to read it a few times myself. It's a good
brilliant
question, but there's a lot to think about. How often does a focus on social prominence and conformity defeat lawyers who are more focused on the quality of their professional contributions and the quality of their work?
Okay. So it's kind of two competing things. We're worried about our status in the profession, our outward external perception of who we are in the profession and fitting into that, or societal expectations of what the good lawyer is supposed to look like, versus worrying about or focusing on caring about the quality of our work. Yeah, that's a great, brilliant question, which with so much to unpack in there. I think what I'm trying to convey to the stakeholders in our profession is that we need to do a better job actually of creating more pathways and making it clear that there's not just one pathway or one definition of what is acceptable as social prominence in the profession. Instead, we should be more focused on the quality of our work and also helping each law student and lawyer tap into really their individual. There's a sports concept called eyes off, individual zone of optimal functioning. Like, where do we each do our best work? Because we tend to be all funneled into, there's transactional and there's litigation. Which one are you going to do? What does a socially prominent transactional lawyer look like? And what does a socially prominent litigator look like? let's let all that go and forge our own paths and show through the quality of our work that we're going to create a new path. We're going to create a new definition of what it means to be socially prominent. And we don't have to conform. I know right now it feels like we do have a lot of pressure to conform to sort of this ideal of what a quote good litigator looks like, or what a good transactional lawyer looks like. But in my opinion, I see my amazing law students come into my classroom. I teach legal writing, so it's a small class of 20 students. There are 20 amazing, unique individuals in there. So we shouldn't all have to conform. I don't know if I'm answering the question in the way that it was intended, but I would say we should focus on the quality of our work and forging our own individual paths towards success.
Perfect. And then I see a question in the chat was already answered. I think I have one last question, and it's something I've experienced, and I know a lot of my students have as well. Whenever students, or especially law students, whenever they're going into an environment where they're interning and they're clerking, there's issues of these supervisors that, I don't know, the power dynamic between a student and a supervisor, it's so uneven that I think a lot of times students feel uncomfortable or don't even know where to go for help. You can do like work internally on yourself and know that if you've done your best work, then there's nothing you can do, and it's not a you problem, it's a them problem. But do you have any suggestions for, I don't know, if things get out of hand, what students can do? Because I think oftentimes they're afraid to, go to management because they know that everybody in that office is, already has some kind of relationship with their supervisor.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've definitely been in that situation myself. It's so hard when you're in that more vulnerable position in the hierarchy. I mean, working in big firms, the medium-sized and bigger firms will have confidential HR people that you can talk to about those dynamics. The smaller firms likely won't. I mean, the firm I worked in that had 10 lawyers, there was nobody to really talk to. So I felt like I was kind of left on my own. But that's when, in those situations, I would reach out. In bar associations have great confidential mentors you can talk to. Please, anybody can feel free to call me, email me. I can help talk through these types of issues. But kind of working through those steps, realizing that situation, that dynamic is not your fault. That particular supervisor who maybe is difficult to work with, people have been probably excusing that behavior for years and years and years. It's going to be hard for you as a new attorney to change that. Remember, I mean, I know what it's like to need the job that I got and not want to cause any ripples, but in the end, you get to choose whether you want to stay in that dynamic too. And while it might not seem feasible to walk away or find a new job that early, you can eventually walk away. I have walked away from jobs without other jobs lined up. And I've been able to work it out so that I haven't had to sit in that unhealthy, toxic environment for much longer. But reach out to people in your confidential mentors. I'm happy to be one of those for any of you. I'm sure Lynn would help talk through any bullying issues as well. You do not have to stay in a situation like that for your career. But on the positive note, there are also things that we can do and improve our communication skills to try to articulate respectfully and professionally to our supervisors how they can get the best work out of us. So that's hard to do, but we can do that too.
And on the blog, I have a section called Ask a Coach. And every day I get at least one or two questions related to my supervisor is a jerk who does this. And I always here's a strategy to outsmart the jerk. And then if you want me to write an article about it, I will, and you can print it and hand it to him or her.
I wanted to just make a quick comment because Chloe kind of hit the nail on the head. That was going to be my second question to both of you, if no one else had the question, which is, when do students, attorneys, paralegals even, when do they, just make that decision to get out of the situation, right? Because that's what my issue was too, as an intern, as a young attorney. I didn't want to rock the boat and go to HR or go to a manager, or even I didn't know how to stand up for myself, or I don't know if that was going to cause a rift, and because I was at the bottom of the totem pole. So what you guys both said which is great, is find a mentor somewhere that you can trust, that you feel like is someone who can listen to you. I can tell you right now, I would have quit every single job that I had where I've either been bullied or seen bullying if I didn't have a mentor in that office that walked me through these things, told me how to navigate it, helped me build my confidence, because a lot of them, it was awful experiences, right? And what sort of Lynn and Heidi said is there's other jobs out there that where you don't have to deal with that. So really know your worth, really know what you deserve in life, because you don't deserve that. Nobody does. And so get a mentor in those kind of offices. If you right away, even before the bullying starts, right, before anything happens, try to find a mentor, someone who's higher up that you can trust and talk to, and they can kind of walk you through some of those situations.
You have more power than you know. Particularly in this job environment, you have much more power than you know. And you're making me think of a situation where there was a really effective trial litigator, and I was working on something with a large oil company, and I had a styrofoam cup of water next to me. And the third time he said something that I found really objectionable, I went, "Oh my goodness." And it was all over his suit. And then I asked the nice assistant for a cup of hot coffee. And he said, "Oh, you're arming yourself." And I said, "Oh, no. And I think sometimes you can do a lot with a sense of humor.
That's true. That is very true. And I like the one sentence, arsenal of being able to, if I had that when I was younger, that would have helped me a lot, because I did do the same thing. I would kind of get quiet, not know how to react, and also be processing, like you said, and think, oh, is this me? Did I do, is this, because you think it's you, and it's really a lot of times it's not. So, So anyways, this has been really great. Any other questions? Did we get any other questions in the chat?
I did receive another question if we have time for it. This person wants to know, how can minorities, specifically in the legal profession, so including women, people of color, assert themselves in a professional way in a profession that is so male dominated? Our approaches, both culturally and educationally, tend to be so different.
Another terrific question. Yeah, I mean, I had to really, as a woman in a male dominated industry niche within the law, within the legal profession, I felt all this, the question earlier about conformity, I felt all this pressure to conform and act like the men. And then when I finally realized that my true power came from being me, it kind of shocked them. I started going into negotiations with my style, which was quiet, but I used my strength, which was writing, and I'd prepare these charts and they didn't know what to do with that. So I would say, again, mentoring is key, and also looking out for each other is key, and strength spotting. Like when we see each other doing something that's really amazing, we need to strength spot it and say it in front of the male, the traditional male attorneys, and have ripple effects of them noticing. But I'm really all about, let's tap into our own power. Let's have our own style. And it is going to shock some people sometimes, but they will get used to it. They will get used to it. And if they don't, it might not be the right job fit. And I understand the dynamics of needing jobs. I totally needed them too. But eventually you will find that fit of that great office dynamic or that great work dynamic that champions and heralds and is proud of your particular style. And then you become the role model for the next person. And it'll have ripple effects throughout our profession. So I know that's not an easy thing to do. It's easier said than done, but really owning your own style, helping each other, and we all need to really note when you shine in particular office dynamics or in meetings or in lawyering scenarios, because again, all of us bring unique strengths and we all bring assets to the profession, and we don't all have to be the same.
Also, in 2022, you have an asset that people didn't have in 2019 and prior, because so much has happened in the country that's given a lot of folks an interest in diversity and inclusion. And many large and small organizations are scrambling to become more diverse and inclusive, and they don't even know what it means. And social media, if you start to put things out that are reasoned and thoughtful, you become a thought leader. And it's amazing how quickly that happens. I know because in 1978, when I started as a management consultant, people said, well, there's no woman management consultant. There's only management consultants. And I would think very interesting. But when I started a weekly newspaper column, people got really quiet because if they ticked me off, I wrote about them. I'm routing this back to Rachel and Claude and Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of good questions. You brought up a lot of good topics to think about. And I think I'm glad that you gave a lot of scenarios, Heidi, of the real world life profession in law, and then also both of you giving solutions and sort of things how to kind of combat this if you are faced with this. So you're not just the deer in the headlights. So thank you both. This was amazing. I'm getting a lot of comments in the chat saying how great, this presentation was and how folks are going to get a lot out of it. So thank you so much for being here with us. We do appreciate your time. Before we go, Chloe had a random raffle generator for folks that we're going to get your books. So there's 2 books, and Chloe, if you want to just list the names who got which kind of book, and then hopefully you have the emails you can.
Well, actually, so this is what I'm going to do. So there's 2 different books. There's Untangling Fear in Lawyering, a 4-step journey towards powerful advocacy by Heidi Brown, who's here with us. And then Beating the Workplace Bully, a tactical guide to taking charge by Lynn, who's also here with us. We're very grateful for them for speaking today. I have a list of everyone that was in attendance. And just for time's sake, because I know we're over time, I'm going to do a random kind of number generator, and then 6 copies of those will be given away to the attendees on the list. So you will receive an email from me if you were one of those recipients.
Okay, so I got it. So I thought you were gonna do it now, but I see what you're saying. You're gonna email the folks who got it. Thank you, Chloe, and you'll be announced as well in our newsletter when it comes out. So thank you all for being here. We super appreciate your time as well. We know you have busy lives, and hopefully you got a lot out of today's presentation, and we'll see you for the next one. So thank you again, Heidi and Lynn.
Thank you from Chile, Alaska.
Yes, wow. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.